Okay, it's been 2 years since I was here last time, and I will show you why. Because I was giving birth to a new company called WorkingGroupTwo, and some of you have seen a little bit of the background of the project, but I'll try to give you a quick update today and say what we're going to do. So first, what are we doing? We have been building a mobile core network, basically from the ground up. And the reason we did so was to enable developers to do experiments and build products in a very different way than it's possible in most core networks today. And the company that I'm with is now offering the result of this effort as a service, of course. And it's the full core network of a full stack MVNO, typically. And we are today working with both MVNOs and also MNOs to enable them to bring new services to the market. So where did it start? So this was a project that was initiated within a fairly large telco, Telenor, out of Norway. They also have a lot of operations in Asia, so I think about 200 million customers. And we were challenged to build new services on the core of the operator. So that means SMS, voice, data, etc. And I'm not sure if you recognize this, but this is the Swedish chef. He's a very creative guy, but it can be a little bit messy. So the problem was that getting access to the resources and the real customers on a running operation is very difficult. So you can imagine if you have a multi-billion-dollar business, you don't want this guy necessarily to mess around too much before it's proven. But that is also blocking you from actually doing the experiments you need. So typically what happens in many telcos is that either they buy an off-the-shelf solution, which hopefully is good, or you set down a committee and you think out a new solution and you implement it and you roll it out and you hope that the user will take it. So this started out in 2013, and we actually had to give that up because we built a few nimble services. We managed to roll them out in a limited scope and area. And then we want to roll it out in the full footprint of Telenor at that time. It turned out that was almost impossible. So even though the core services are the same, the way of setting up these networks and integrating them and so on was quite prohibitive. So we almost gave it up. And then in 2014, we actually said, well, let's bring in some of the new technologies that's been invented last 30 years when it comes to software, open source, etc., and see if we can actually rebuild the core network for this purpose. And the first time I was here, and I think it was 2015, we actually said, yeah, we actually are able to do something here. And we showed some demos. In 2016, we were back. And Telenor, being a commercial company, they wanted to see that this could be rolled out to real users. And then you need some nines, you need some security, etc. So we spent a long time doing that. And then last year, I couldn't come here because actually then we spun the project out to Telenor and created a new company. And the main reason for that was to be able to support also competitors of Telenor. And being Telenor, selling to competitors can be a bit difficult, at least if you're the buying side. And also we saw that we wanted to have the freedom to recruit different kinds of talent that naturally falls into the fold of Telenor. And this is what we have been doing since then. This year has been quite eventful. We have actually gone live with our first customer, which is actually a Telenor customer in Sweden. So we're very excited about that, and I'll come back to you a little bit what they've been able to do in this early phase. So this is one of our inspirations. Another inspiration, I get a lot of questions about our name, WorkingGroupTwo. It actually came from one of the Gs. So the transition between 1 and 2G, if you remember that in the late 80s, early 90s, going from analog to digital was the big thing. There was a couple of guys, actually a few Norwegians, that started working on the radio side of things. And their area and the working group was WorkingGroupTwo. And it was very unlikely, when looking at on paper, that a couple of professors at a technical university would be able to compete with the big guys. But that's what they did. The main reason for that was that they grew up in this country, which has a lot of mountains, and there's a little bouncing back and forth and so on. So they learned how to handle that, which is not unlike this particular city, where there was a competition between all the different vendors, because there was a lot of interest, of course, to have the proposed standards of the individual vendors to win through. So what I think it was Etsy was doing was to host a competition where they had a set route in Paris, and in the cars they were doing tests to verify that the theory was actually working, and they will then say there's a winner based on the test results. Turns out that these fairly funky looking guys, this is actually one of the guys, Torleiv Maseng. He's testing this in the Norwegian mountains, and this is actually a 2G phone. And I'm not sure if he's actually talking to his best friend over here, Mr. Snowman there, but he's out on skis and he's testing like crazy, and he ended up actually being part of the team, a fairly small team, that won the whole competition. And that's why we also picked up that name. So actually this is one of the, I think, success stories of being a small team, a lot of focus, solving the real problem in competition with large vendors. So why do we do this? I talked a little bit about it. But basically we want to enable the MNOs, or the operators, to actually care about product innovation beyond adding another G. So there's a lot of effort going into new Gs. But if you look at SMS, MMS, and voice as core services, there's like limited number of innovations that's coming out of the operators since it was launched in the early 90s. A typical example is, here's an example of, not totally random, but it's an operator in Sweden that we work with. They were quite happy with an innovation where they made the counter. You see it's 18 days and there's an offer and whatever. And I talked to the guys there, and they were quite impressed by their innovation. And then at the same day, I looked at their competitors' front page, and lo and behold, they have some innovation there as well, and it's quite similar. And I think many operators see this every day, that competing means doing a different price plan, wrapping it up in some new shape or form, but you don't really do a lot of innovation on the core service, which is a little bit too bad. I think everyone wants to, but I think many, if you talk to operators today, have kind of given up. It's outsourced to someone else, and it's kind of outsourced to committees that are building standards, like RCS is an example of, which is quite tricky. It's a very long distance from sitting in a committee thinking up a new idea and actually looking at what the end user really needs and wants, and then building it and rolling it out. I'm not sure how many years now, Dean, the RCS service was supposed to be there. Okay, but I think there's still many people in the operators that really want to do something. It was just really, really difficult. And it's hard to recruit developers that would like to help them. So one thing is caring, another one is actually doing something about it. And this is what we hope to bring to the table. So actually, what they started doing, and I think this was the first time in a long time, they actually start to interview their customer base. And they have a lot of millennials in their subscriber base. And if you know any of those, actually receiving a phone call can be quite traumatic. They really don't want to receive phone calls unless they really know what's going on. All right? Either you need to text me, I'm going to call you, can I call you? Yes, maybe, or whatnot. And especially if it's from a number you don't know, then it's almost freak out mode. This is also happening in a wider context now, where you see a lot of spam calling. I think in the US now it's gone like completely crazy, but I still have examples from my own family where they suddenly get a phone call from Microsoft that wants to help them with their machinery, blah, blah, blah. And this is going, and it's kind of escalating. So these two together made this customer want to build a service that actually blocks most of your calls in the network. So what they have invented and what they were able to do the interviews, they talked to the customers, and they tried to respond to that with actually building a fairly small service. But this, even though it should be possible on any core network, is probably very difficult on most core networks. So basically, you set up only a limited number of your favorites. That's your kind of whitelist. They will always go through. Everything else will be blocked in the network, and you will just get a notification saying that someone called you. And then it's up to you to call them back. Further, you could get more metadata about the number, like if it's a sale or if it's a spam call or whatever in the next phase. But this is something they're rolling out. And this is maybe the first time since they actually launched their service that they actually built a product that they could give to the customers. If this is going to make a huge difference, we don't know. But actually, they can actually try it out. And this, I think, is the main point. And then you have a list of your block calls, so you can consider calling them back. A little bit of what we do to enable some of these things is our focus is not on building customer care. It's not in the radio network, but it's in the core network. And traditionally, there has been two components there, the core network itself and then value-added services. And I think in the old days, SMS was a value-added service and voicemail as well. Where we fit in the network today is typically that you set up something like a full stack MVNO, integrating of the standard roaming interfaces into a host network. And we stand up all the components required to run basically a full network. And the way we build these are very different from the classic setup. It's a system, which means we can do things internally because we control all the different components. So we don't need to use protocols from the 70s if we don't need to. However, when we integrate with these networks on the external networks or interfaces, we of course need to be fully compliant with the standards. But inside, we can do a lot of optimizations to do things, build things faster, open up more APIs, and drive basically the innovation path very hard. Yes, and this is a picture I've shown before. And it started out being, you know, Lego blocks. And I think Lego is great. But sometimes the number of bricks can be a bit of a problem. And this is actually not enough to deliver VoLTE. This is the basic IMS stack. You know, there's still some components you need to handle things like handover from 2G to 3G, etc. But the sheer complexity of this is real. And actually, I have to be a little bit careful because I was part of a big company, Swedish company, that was part of standardization in the early 2000s. So it got a little bit out of hand for delivering the fairly limited set of services that we actually do. So what we've been able to do is, on a high level, we compress and enhance, hopefully, these things. We have the functional equivalent. But we can get rid of a lot of the complexity that was introduced with this and still deliver a basic service. But we are not about the basic service. We want to deliver something more. And some examples that I think I showed in 2016, many of them at least, is WebRTC happened. All right? And we had a sister team, which is also spun out of Telenor now, called Appear.in. I'm not sure if you use that. But we had a lot of common resources working on these projects. So in our setup, WebRTC is kind of a native. And it's also a very natural part of the core, which enables us to deliver WebRTC integration out of the box. So my SIM card, when it rings, it will also immediately be forking the calls to any WebRTC endpoint I'm logged in at. So it could be an app, could be a web browser. And this is not rocket science, but it's really, really hard to do in traditional core networks. And we see that by doing things differently, this kind of comes out of the box. Because we started in 2014, we didn't do this in '94. And many of the vendors of today, they need to take care of the '94 setup and the way things were done then. And we do not need to do that. And that enables us to do things like that. There's been a lot of talking about speech to text. A lot of the value I think that we can bring is just opening up the core assets so you can match them up with other great services like speech to text. So fairly easily we can fork the media streams to a service like Google Speech to Text or any of the other vendors. And in real time you can get speech to text back as a service. And we had a team member that enjoyed that because of a hearing problem. And he wanted an app that would print in real time what was being said in the conversation. It's a very basic thing, but it's a very valuable thing if you need it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with if this and that. So you have actuators, and we could then expose signaling into if this and that, and you can have trigger points based on whatever you set up. We did some basic demos where you can copy all your SMSs into a spreadsheet. You can trigger a UE lamp. You can log the duration of a call. You can act on a specific number when it dials in, turning the UE lamp into a certain color. We also had a basic test of using Alexa. Sometimes, at least if you have a Norwegian English accent, it can be more funny than useful. But it's improving, I think, all the time. And if you can take advantage of a very natural interface, which is voice, on your native dialer and include some of these skills, I think there's a lot of value that can be created. And this, again, is a fairly simple thing for us to do because we have built the whole core network to be able to do this. We have also done some experiments on security and collaboration products where you initiate your call in your native dialer and then you can end up on a full video conferencing system and then you can bring it back seamlessly. So these are some examples that in themselves are not rocket science, but if you combine enough of them and if you give our customers the ability to iterate fast, you said 1 hour? Iterate fast and bring it to the market and take it back and redo it. I think that's the great value we can bring. And with that, I just reiterate what we do. If you want to reach out to us, we're more than happy to have a chat about that. There's two things. One is the operator side, which is a very strong partner for us, but also looking at potential applications, platforms on top is very interesting for us. So please reach out if you think this is interesting.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Werner. Again, it's a great story in terms of the steps you've taken in spinning out and then creating basically a good base of business. And definitely for some of the telco apps that are out there, I think that it's definitely one of the partners you need.